Even with all the controversy surrounding emulation with the takedown of some popular emulators, one that shall not be named because I don't want to incur the wraths of the ones who took them down, it has still been a great year for emulation development, and I want to take some time to highlight some of the emulators that have had some amazing accomplishments this year. Short for Multi-Arcade Machine Emulator, MAME has without a doubt been in constant development, never stopping on an endless crusade to bring all the hardware devices that house games into their legendary ecosystem. With that being said, where MAME has always shined the brightest is in their effort to preserve arcade hardware specifically, and I feel like this year they've really reached some amazing milestones in this regard. Earlier this year, MAME had some fixes to the Taito F3 hardware, fixing outstanding graphical and sound issues, and this is just where things began. It has been years since MAME broke new territory in supporting 3D accelerated arcade games, but it has been the last few years that have really produced the greatest improvements, and this year has been no different. In just the last few months, performance improvements for Namco System 12 and System 23 have been released. For those of you who don't know, Namco System 12 supports the legendary Tekken 3 arcade game, while System 23 supports Time Crisis 2, a sequel to the amazing light gun shooter that introduced a new gameplay mechanic to the genre. One of the last big improvements of the year on MAME was Konami's 3DO M2 hardware, which also has a big boost in performance for games that I personally didn't even know existed. It honestly makes me wish I had invested in the light gun when I had the means to do so, but at least there is so much to look forward to when I can. The PCX2 definitely had a monumental year as the developers finally released their long-awaited stable build of the emulator dubbed version 2.0. Though many of the quality of life features had long since been added to the ongoing nightly builds, this culmination of all the tireless work that had been produced thus far really did make this stable release a special one. Now with a new and improved GUI using the popular QT design, it has made navigating settings and making changes with using a game controller so much easier. The Vulkan renderer has been added, which means performance improvements across the board, and you can even improve the look when you raise the internal resolution by using HD texture packs when they are available. As it stands, there are 97.92% PlayStation 2 games that are in a playable state, and that is nothing to scoff at given the fact that there are 3,436 titles that were released during the console's lifecycle. One new addition that is a very big deal in my opinion is the fact that you'll now be able to update the next big version release or continue down the nightly road through the emulator itself. So yeah, the quality of life improvements are just really mind-blowing. You might see a running theme here with my next best emulators, but I assure you, this is by no fault of my own. You are really just gonna have to blame the developers. With that being said, I'd be remiss if I did not bring up the amazing work that the developers of RPCS3 have done this year. Save states have gone through a vast improvement this year, improving on both performance and the amount of data they can create, which from what I understand was above 100 megabits. With hard drives being as big as they are now, it's easy to forget just how much these things can add up, so I definitely appreciate the effort that was put into this. Of course, things don't stop there as the developers found a way to unleash more performance from low-end CPUs. We're talking 4 cores, 4 threads here. Some of you may remember what I said about RPCS3 with the 3200G. The PS3 emulator RPSC3 is basically a no-go. Well, I've gone back to take a look to see if there are improvements with the 3200G, and I think I could say without a shadow of a doubt that things are very much a go with the latest version of RPCS3. This may have been the catalyst for another shattering milestone that I'll bring up in just a few, but before that I do want to highlight some other improvements. Graphical fixes are always a constant when it comes to emulation development, and RPCS3 has had a few breakthroughs in this regard. Much of those improvements were highlighted in games that use Insomniac's PS3 engine, like Ratchet & Clank and the Resistance series. One of the most challenging parts of emulation, in my opinion, is bringing back a multiplayer online component that functions like it did originally. When developers first introduced RPCN, I could have never imagined how seamless the integration would be, let alone the fact that by September of this year, there'd be support for over 50 games that have an online mode available. While I personally haven't had the opportunity to experience this fully, it always warms the heart to see players reconnecting with games they played in the past, and I know I'll eventually be joining the fun at some point. Finally, we have the biggest milestone that this emulator has reached this year with native support for ARM64 devices. Who would have thought that we would ever see RPCS3 running on a Raspberry Pi of all devices? Definitely not me, but here we are. I certainly can't wait to see more tests using Apple M4's chip as we see how things play out between ARM64 and x86-64 when it comes to performance on this emulator. Though 8th generation emulation has been a thing for a while now, most of us know the hardware that it was based on wasn't what you would technically call 8th generation. For a long time, development for the PlayStation emulation has gone through an arduous journey, and though the last few years did bear some visual fruits of labor, they weren't quite what many of us were looking for. That was until the summer of this year when a specific emulator started to show in-game footage of a game that many have been wanting to play at a certain speed. Shad PS4 is the emulator in question, and it has made phenomenal strides this year when it comes to PlayStation 4 emulation. As of this writing, Bloodborne can be played in-game, and though it's still a work in progress, much of the graphics and more importantly the performance are in a playable state, which means we won't be waiting too much longer until we have a Bloodborne that can be played in 4K at 60 frames per second or higher. Just recently, The Last Guardian has been showing in-game progress as well, so it really looks like we're finally on the cusp of getting our first real taste of 8th generation console emulation. So these are my best emulators of 2024. Obviously, there are so many other emulators that are making incredible headway for their given system, and I do want to give an honorable mention to the developers who have been bringing emulation over to the iOS, something that Apple just started to bring back support for on the Apple Store. Though there are signs that there may be some troubled waters ahead for emulation development, I do still believe there is a bright future for emulation in 2025. So much progress has been made this year that it would be unfathomable to think this train is going to stop abruptly. As always, I'll continue to provide new walkthroughs and hopefully new hardware testing for what should be a pretty big year for dedicated GPUs especially. Please remember to like, share, and consider subscribing, as I'm hoping to provide you with a lot more content in 2025. For now, this is The Core, your entertainment techie, wishing you a happy new year, while also signing out.